Thank you. Thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me. And it was wonderful listening to, Rujira, Vinita, and, Mary ma'am. It's always good to be with youngsters to remain young. As Rujira pointed out, in 2000, when this project was given to an IPSP, I just joined my institute. So if you compare my days in 2000 regarding that pioneering project and where India is now, that journey is very humbling. And it's so good to be that part of that journey. And for the students, I can tell you that story. You are from the political economy or the political science student, so I don't want to get into the too much technical, but I can tell you that how a new project translated into one of the blue projects of India. In the beginning, it appeared as a fiscal innovation, and you can connect to this fiscal innovation because now we are grappling with climate change concerns, and nobody has any idea how we can integrate that into the budget as climate responsive budgeting, and they are looking forward to learn from how the gender budgeting is integrated. So the concerns like gender, climate change, taking these concerns and integrating that into macro policy framework is a challenge. It's a challenge because if you look into the fiscal framework, over the years we have moved towards a very strict fiscal framework, and we have to keep certain norms. We call it as norms, or we call it as threshold ratios, like you can't spend beyond 3% of GDP. You have to be strict about your deficit, and if there is a high deficit or high debt which is mounting, then the political economy questions you have to answer in the parliament or in the legislative assembly. So given that strict norm, or given that constraints in the fiscal space, integrating gender into that constrained fiscal space was never easy. So what you have done is you try to apply a gender lens into the existing fiscal policy space, that how much our country is spending for women. So in that case, our first exercise was to understand the transparency of budget with relate to how much India is spending for women. That's exactly what is that gender budgeting statement, which we started collating by applying a mandate. It's not really law, but by mandate, that budget call circulars, which Rujira mentioned, that we asked all the ministries to come up with a statement that how much that ministries are spending for women. But over the years, as shown by Rujira in her PowerPoint slide, it's just getting stagnated into around 4 to 5% of the entire budget. So is that the case? When we visualized in 2000, it was not just gender budget statement. It was a much more, a very comprehensive framework. And if you take a look into the first budget statement with relate to gender in 2005, there is a methodology stated there that India has to go ahead with doing the benefit incidence analysis to understand whether the government, there is an elite capture for the government programs across the income quintiles and across the socioeconomic groups. So we need to we need to integrate the intersectionality issues. We need to integrate the class across income quintiles, whether there is elite capture or whether the women and men belong to low income households is accessing it properly. So there are several issues to be looked into the moment we talk about gender budgeting, because as the speakers before me pointed out, it has got efficiency and equity dimensions. Now take a look into the framework of gender budgeting to incorporate any new experiments, or from the ex ante perspective, because in the context of Kerala, I was privy to the discussions prior to the last budget, and in that budget discussions, one of the things came up was related to the indicators on gender in the context of Kerala. But if you look into the traditional statistics like education, health, you can see that our indicators are quite good, like women are educated, and the access statistics of women to health is quite okay. But if you look into certain statistics like domestic violence or violence against women, of course you can say that it is because of the self-censorship threshold, that of course affects data. That was clearly coming out from the Rujira's presentation of contrast between Kerala and Bihar. One point I would love to add to that, inferences she has presented is the self-censorship that can affect the data. For instance, if you collect the data in the context of Kerala, if women are empowered, if you ask a woman whether do you experience gender violence in your home, then she may answer that. But in Bihar, she may not. So if you say that the gender violence is quite high in Kerala, you should also be aware of the fact that the censorship threshold of a woman that affects data. But I'm not telling that everything is fine in the context of Kerala. And second point is the institutions. The presence of institutions in Kerala and Bihar, if you take a comparison and contrast, you can understand that the powerful institutions that also help a woman to come and access and report that she is experiencing violence. And gender budgeting as a policy tool helps in reducing the violence against women. And there is a study by University of California, and they got an inverse relationship between the violence against women and gender budgeting. And that study was in the context of the subnational governments in India. So if there is an inverse relationship between the gender violence and gender budgeting, the role of gender budgeting as a social justice tool is quite important here. And it was clearly marked in the budget speech last year in the context of Kerala that one of the prime concerns of the Kerala, the finance minister, is the increasing domestic violence that's happening against young girls who are married. What could be that state machinery or the government to support those young women suffering, violence within their own household? Such kind of things, should we be giving it to an intra-household policy decision, or should government be participating on those intra-household decisions? That was a concern. It is no longer an intra-household concern at all. Gender budgeting as a policy tool can look into the men and women experiencing the violence within the household. So here the punch statement for a gender budgeting is the unit of analysis of the gender budgeting can never be household. It has to be intra-household. We need to look into what's happening within the household. Otherwise, whether it is violence, whether it is nutrition by looking into the anthropometric data, whether you look into the simple data like anemia, you can understand that. Let me take the example of this, malnutrition. You can see that, in a household, we buy a lot of yaks, milk, a lot of fish, we consume a lot of, protein, but the moment the analysis intra-household and check the anemia of the people living in that house, you can understand that the elderly woman who is supporting the other members of the house, maybe she's chronically anemic. But if you look into that unit of analysis just at the household, nutrition may not be a problem. But the moment you check the nutrition or the malnutrition within the household, you can understand that the woman, the elderly woman, or they may be anemic. So you have to understand what is happening within the household, and you cannot say that that's not the cup of tea of gender budgeting as a policy tool or the role of government. And another, I talked about violence, and in the violence, women always look forward, or the young girls always look forward to what is the next step forward. So if they have to move out of, that violent environment, what is the next step forward? The state machinery, how they can help. So in the last budget, short stay homes was announced that the women can definitely come out if they are experiencing violence, if they want to follow their passions in life, and if they are experiencing chronic violence within the household. That fiscal sociology is also, as a part of gender budgeting, because it's a tool of social justice and education and health. If I focus more, that is only the first generation reforms of gender budgeting. You need to get into the second generation reforms, especially in an empowered state like India, Kerala, and these questions are very relevant. Now, when I began this research in 2000, it was a particularly exposed analysis what we began with, but then in that December, young girl You must be remembering that story. She went out with her friend, after before her exams. So study leaves were on. Just before her exam, she wants to go for an entertainment. She went for that Life of Pi movie, right, with her friend. And in the public transport, in the public roads, that was a public space. Why she was brutally murdered. And we asked the question that why the girl was there after the sunset, why she was with a boyfriend. So these were the questions we asked. But within 30 days, the government was forced to perform. The government was answerable to what has happened in the India in capital city. And in that report, you must be remembering the Justice Verma Committee recommendations, the Bill of Rights, that was in the annexure of that report. And that report was aware of Amartya Sen's capability deprivation framework. In that case, they were aware of the feminist perspective. And what is feminism? We were, very, like a taboo. The moment we say about the feminism, it's like a taboo. What has happened in the West, it's like, prolonged, the freedom we seek. No, it's not feminism. Feminism is like, beautiful men and women can be feminist. The moment you understand that capability deprivation or the human rights perspective is quite crucial to look into, and the budget has got a role to play over there. And in that Bill of Rights, in the Justice Verma Committee recommendations, how to translate the legal fiat into the budget fiat and the fiscal fiat, and nobody has it looked into, only Delhi government looked into for a very short time, but those document is waiting for a champion to come and translate the Bill of Rights for women into budgetary commitments. So why we are not taking it up? So these are the questions we need to ask to move ahead with that promising framework in 2000, in that knowledge building process. We envisaged that gender budgeting has to be a process beyond gender budget statement. Gender budget statement is only one step. So now it is time to reboot gender budgeting by looking to the initial models, the pioneering models that were done in 2000, and the classification of budgetary transactions. That report we have to take a look into. That was Ministry of Finance, that commission. They looked into the budgetary classification reports, that how it can be mainstreamed into the budget. But those kind of discussions just stopped the moment we opened the gender budget statement, when gender budget statement was only one among the various tools of gender budgeting. And I have written a book about it, and I'm announcing it formally in this meeting, that this book is published by Palgrave Macmillan, and I think it will hit the market in October 2022. And now we can pre-order. I think Amazon just yesterday, when I browsed it, I think in the Amazon Japan they announced it, and in Europe, Europe they announced it. But hopefully it will be there in the Amazon India very soon. And in that book, as Rujra pointed out, I looked into the matters not only related to the gender budget statement, but regarding the intergovernmental fiscal mechanisms, and also the principle of subsidiarity and the fiscal decentralization. So the various books, it can be a very good companion for the students and the policymakers and the media people who want to understand the journey of gender budgeting that has happened in India, not only with respect to the gender budget statement, but also with respect to what has happened at the subnational levels and the intergovernmental fiscal transfer mechanisms. And of course, you are political economy students, so you have to understand the political economy of gender budgeting. So the various chapters, it is written for a wider audience, and I hope it will help you. Now, when the moment I mentioned about the political economy of gender budgeting, then we have to understand that gender budgeting is a powerful public financial management tool. The speakers before me, Vinita and Rujira, pointed out about the budget estimates and actual. High budget allocation for gender development per se will not translate into higher expenditure. So you need to look into what is happening in between. And there are many good institutional mechanisms in different countries, like fiscal councils, to look into the budget credibility. But in our country, budget credibility is not looked into by the fiscal councils. This fiscal council is primarily, it's a political council. They look into, whether the promises by the finance minister is backed by, proper allocations. If you are doing a budget estimate announced in the budget after 1 year, when you look into the actuals or the revised estimates, you need to understand that there is no deviation between what you promised in the budget and actual. And gender budgeting, that's a powerful space to tackle the gender inequalities. And if there is a gap between what you promised in the budget and actual, that, looks into the credibility of the finance minister. First, of course, in this journey, there is an acceptance that finance minister can look into the matters related to gender inequality. Because when I began the exercise, now it's a full circle when Rujra presented this, and she said that she learned from my works. But I must say, Rujra, that I learned from my elders, the scholars, because they asked the right questions at the right time. So it was easy for us to do the research. And when it comes to your generation, and you could answer the questions because the scholars prior to us asked the right questions, and that's the way the research progresses and the research translates into a public policy. And to translate a research into a public policy, here institutions are very important, because you understand that what holds our country together is institutions, whether it is finance commissions. Let me spend a moment on finance commission. Rujra also highlighted that I may be speaking about the intergovernmental fiscal transfer mechanism and how it can be integrated, gender can be integrated. So these questions, it was kind of revolution, or it was a tough, deliberation the moment we asked gender can be integrated into this framework, because they were talking about the fiscal variables, like it is from the higher government to the lower government, they are devolving tax transfers. So in that tax transfers, the primary objective is to offset the fiscal capacity across the jurisdictions. So when your primary mandate is to offset the fiscal capacity across the jurisdictions, what can you talk about gender over there? This was the kind of opposition we need to tackle the moment we talk about gender into the intergovernmental fiscal mechanisms. But over the years, there's a kind of understanding that in the tax transfers, if you can incorporate gender as one of the criteria, then things will be a little better, rather than just focusing on population as your criteria. One moment. Excuse me. And the moment I talk about this intergovernmental fiscal transfers, it is not only just confined to what's happening from the national government to subnational governments. What's happening within the state finance commissions, what could be that ideal indicators to be integrated into the state finance commissions the moment you decide the transfers from state to the local bodies, that is also quite relevant, because we have got that wonderful policy space at the local level, that feminization of governance at 33 and above 33%. Excuse me. So that space we need to properly utilize to have revealed preferences of women in integrating their concerns into the budgetary policies. And this experiment was done by Duflo, the Nobel laureate, whether feminization of governance can translate into public expenditure decisions that can integrate the concerns of women into the expenditure decisions or in the policy making. And she got an answer in affirmative, that feminization of governance is quite crucial to understand or to bring diversity, insights and talents on board. Otherwise, if you visualize that the fastest process of developing a country is to take women on board, to get them into the labor force participation, you need to understand that empirically we infer that the participation of women in the economy is a kind of U-shaped phenomenon. Like when an economy progresses, initially the female economic activity rate, that participation comes down and then it goes up. So in that feminization view, that's quite powerful or not in the context of India, the empirical studies looked into this question, and we understood that the link between gender budgeting and the gender outcomes, that was quite okay in the context of education and health, but it was not okay in the context of, you know, female labor force participation. And the reasons were also cited by Vinita and Rujra before me, and Dr. Mary also cited a bit why it's not happening, because we always look into the sectors which are measured, sectors which are monetized, and what is not measured, it's not a part of, you know, public policy making. So in that sense, you know, the care economic activity, what is happening, that is not measured. It is tough to measure. And what is not measured, that's not a part of, you know, your public policy making. But, you know, as speakers before me pointed out, if you come up with a very comprehensive care economy infrastructure package, you know, then this fastest and smartest way to develop that could be the women on board in the labor market. So that question we need to look into. Now, what we have tackled is only one element of it, that is childcare. Like women can take, like in discrete or continuous, you know, 2 years she can be away from her service with full protection if she's looking after a kid. You know, we have seen that there is a kind of crisis, is mainly not from the patriarchy, but when there are moments of crisis within the household, then the women, you know, despite they learned the subject passionately, they have to quit the labor market to take care of the concerns related to the household, what is happening within the household. But right now, through policy process, we have changed a bit related to childcare, but the other components are not, you know, integrated. So we have to think about it like elderly health care. You know, if I am away from my work to take care of my close ailing relative, you know, I should not be on toast, and my boss should not call me back, because, you know, in the context of Canada, there is a compassionate care benefit which looks into this question with dignity, that if you are away from the workforce to take care of your ailing relative, then there is compassionate care benefits. So such kind of policy processes needs a different sort of thinking process, and intelligent policy makers can integrate those kind of concerns in the context of India, and we need to move ahead in those, you know, that path. One instance quickly I can tell you and conclude this speech is about what has happened in Scandinavia. And if you look into the Human Development Index, Gender Development Index, you know, Gender Inequality Index, if you quantify, you know, you can see in the global scale, Scandinavian countries are at the top. And, you know, there's a kind of public policy revolution that has happened in the context of, you know, Scandinavian countries. In North Europe, you know, that kind of awareness that has happened, that revolution in the public policy that has happened is the acceptance that the real love and the care happens in a society when there is fundamental independence with each other. You know, you are not dependent on other, and you are not being able to live authentic. Excuse me. If that is the case, what is the role of the state to provide you space to live authentic? If a child is not in school because she cannot live authentic, because the primary responsibility to ensure fuel and water in a household is girl's responsibility, then increasing education budget will not increase the enrollment rate. So in Morocco, different experiments that has happened at the fiscally decentralized space, that what can increase the enrollment of the girl child. So if she has to live authentic, we have to do with the education budget, or we need to do a complementary fiscal services by taking into consideration of the matters which cut across multi-sectors like water budgets and do the gender budgeting. So these are the questions which need to look into. Otherwise, you know, if the fundamental independence between people, you know, if that is a basis of love, that is a basis of, you know, the real citizenship, then, you know, this calculus of consent, when you vote back the government in retrospect, you need to look into the public policy decisions taken by the government or the role of state in tackling these kind of issues, because the sector which is care economy, there is crisis, and how long the care economy can support the market economy, because everything is functioning. properly because somebody else is left behind. So when the economy progresses, if a part of women or young children are left behind and economic growth, there is a V-shaped recovery is announced in the economy, then we have to ask twice whether we kept that people who left behind into the budget making process or in the policy making process. And that exactly is a gender budgeting, to remove these unfreedoms and to these vulnerabilities of the people and to take them on board. So that exactly is gender budgeting, and those policy perspectives can happen from an ex-ante gender budgeting level. So if you want to take a look into that work, it's called Swedish Love. The people talk about, as an economist, I am perceived as heartless because we look into only the GDP numbers. But gender budgeting is a revolution as a policy tool which happened in 2000 to take that agenda of the economic policy makers, to take the paradigm shift or to take the paradigm ahead from the economic growth to a growth plus paradigm, incorporating. So I am talking about my experience that time, even prior to a global goal for UN. I'm talking about an era prior to the MDGs and SDGs. So in that time, if gender budgeting was perceived as an economic growth plus paradigm, we need to reboot what is happening in the India right now, looking into the pioneering models and look into what exactly needs to be done to take the gender budgeting to the next level. And it was like a very humbling process. And when I see youngsters like Rujira and Vinita, it was very heartening to listen to the way they have kept the research alive from 2000 and the way India is progressing in gender budgeting, and that was very heartening to listen to. And that time, the process was very lonely in the corridors of Public Finance Institute when, we started this progress. So if you ask me, there is a progress. Of course, there is a progress, because in terms of fiscal transparency and accountability, we have done a lot. But we need to take it ahead from, just confining the research to the gender budgeting statement ahead to the gender budget benefit incidence analysis and other kind of tracking and linking the resources to, research. So that should be, the prime objective of gender budgeting. Thank you so much once again, and a special thanks to Ashwati for having me and my friend in IIT, Binita. She suggested my name to speak to the students. And the students can always, get in touch with me over Twitter, or, you can share with them my email address. And thank you so much for giving this opportunity to talk to them. Over to you.